In my early 20s, as I was really building my business, I unfortunately cut out a lot of people, and that kind of came to bite me a couple of years ago.
I wonder if you have any stories you could share with the podcast, with the listeners.
Ooh, I don't know. I've had couples, wake up in the morning, go surfing together, have some pizza, and then take a helicopter, just the two of them up a mountain to share their vows. We bought the house, we had the dog. It was like we had that white picket fence life. Oh my goodness.
You are now in the element, where we dive into raw stories and vibrant journeys that shape who we are. Let's get in the element.
So welcome back to the Element podcast, where we bring on some awesome people that have had the drive, the courage to pursue their passions and come tell their stories. If you enjoyed today's episode, feel free to like and subscribe to In the Element podcast, spelled LMNT. And you can also find us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube under the same handle. So without further ado, I'm very excited to introduce Tash Cloutier, who's going to share her story today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much. So a little bit about Tash. Tash Cloutier is the owner of Dear Darling Films, an all-female wedding filmmaking team based in Ottawa, Canada. Launched in 2019, Tash's vision for Dear Darling Films was to provide newly engaged couples with a modern alternative to traditional wedding videography and defy the stereotypes that are often associated with it. Tash was an international finalist at the 2022 Love Stories TV Wedding Films Awards. She's been featured in publications such as Style Me Pretty and Today's Bride, and she was named Best Videographer at the Ottawa Wedding Awards. She has since expanded her business to film weddings and elopements across Canada, to mentor aspiring wedding filmmakers, and to speak at filmmaker conferences. Wow. You've done quite a bit for someone in their 20s. You've built out your company. You've met so many incredible people, and you're pretty much part of what I would say the biggest milestones of a person's life, their wedding, right? Before we get into all of that, how did you get into wedding videography?
Wedding videography. And if I take it all the way back, I can kind of trace how I got there just based on my interests when I was really, really young. I think there's always been a little creative side to me, and storytelling has kind of been the overarching theme of most of the interests that I took up growing up. I was always someone who loved words. And so I was the kid who was finding the typos on the cereal boxes or the newspaper articles. I was a really big nerd when it came to words and writing and reading and all of that stuff. So as soon as I learned how to read and write, I was writing these little short stories. And so I would say it's interesting that I ended up kind of choosing video as the medium to tell my stories, but ultimately video is kind of what I landed on and what stuck. I got my hands on my first camera when I was 14, and instantly, just after making that first music video of myself, I was in love. I was obsessed, not with myself, but with video.
Oh, I love it.
And so anyway, all that to say, I think I've always been somewhat of a creative person who loved telling different stories in different ways. But for weddings specifically, it was a journey. It was about 10 years of trying all sorts of different types of video production before I really landed on weddings specifically. I tried it all. I tried sports videography, travel videography, corporate videography. And while all of those were super great in their own ways, weddings it just hit home in a different way where I felt really a part of the community. And weddings being a female dominated industry as a whole really made me feel a way that I hadn't felt in sort of the other spaces that I had been in as a videographer. And so that's ultimately what stuck. But I genuinely feel like I could have gone so many different directions and been still very happy with the direction of my life. It's just weddings are kind of...
It was kind of like your calling.
Yeah. Well, I was on YouTube one night, came across this wedding video that really was so different from any other wedding video I had seen in the past, I guess. It was a true film, and it was cinematic in a way that I hadn't seen other ones be made before. And just the emotional impact that it had on me as someone who was a complete stranger to these, and I did not know the couple, obviously, but I just, it hit in an emotional way that none of the other types of videos that I had made up until that point had made me feel. And so I decided to just kind of give it a go, see if I truly enjoyed it. And yeah, I have never left.
So I want to go back in time a little bit because
Yeah.
obviously, like you mentioned, your journey, it's been many years of you kind of trial and error, trying different things. So going back to like school, university, what were you doing at the time? What were you studying? And how did that kind of lead into videography?
Right. I really started getting into video in a very amateur way, I would say, as of 14, making music videos with my best friends.
So I wasn't the only one
Oh,
making videos.
Definitely not.
That were never posted.
We probably came across. Oh, you didn't post yours. Okay. I was going to say, I should probably make mine unlisted, to be honest. No one needs to see that. But yeah, no. So I always say too, I feel like if TikTok was around back in our day, I would have been one of those kids dancing, doing all the TikTok dances and all of that stuff. But I was doing the dances just in a different format. But yeah, so that was my first sort of attempt at videos. But it was very much a hobby, and I just genuinely didn't even think that it was possible at the time to make a career out of video production. I mean, I think kids in general, they have like their childhood dream job, right, of what they want to be as adults. And for most people, it's an astronaut or a vet or whatever. For me, my dream job, and I'm not kidding, it was to be an editor at a magazine publishing company.
That's not very far off from what you were saying, because you're like, I love the idea of storytelling.
I love the idea of storytelling. I love words, and I'm very detail oriented. But I made that choice when I was like 8 years old. And something about me is once I make a decision, I kind of put my blinders on, and that's the decision I made. And
Like
I'm going to
hyper focus on that.
I'm going to see it through till the very end. And so I was literally 8 years old when I made this decision.
Yeah.
And I didn't have any sort of adults in my life that were really pressuring me to go any certain way. But because I made that decision, I had this sort of idea of how my life was going to play out to get to that, being that young, which is kind of wild. And I think even on a deeper level, I grew up as an only child with my mom, being a single mom in the early days. And I think subconsciously even, I wanted to do my mom proud, and I didn't want to be a burden, as terrible as that sounds. We didn't have a lot growing up, and she was an amazing mom and provided me with so much. And I just wanted to make a safe choice career-wise to kind of make sure that my mom didn't feel like she made all these sacrifices for nothing. And so I think that was a big driving factor too, growing up of, okay, well, these are hobbies. These are fantastic. I love that I'm a creative person just generally. But if I have to really make a decision to pursue something that's going to allow me to, be a responsible adult, then let's go the safer route by choosing something that's a little bit more safe,
So what did you end up studying in school?
Yeah, so I went to the University of Ottawa for communications, which isn't super far off from what I do now in the sense that it was still touching on media, and there was one class on video production, but it was really that one video production class in university that really set me on that first part of my journey of like, oh, okay, maybe I can actually do video in a professional way and get paid to do it, because that class ultimately led to so many more opportunities. So yeah, I finished my degree in communications, and I went and worked in the government straight out of university as a videographer.
As many people in Ottawa do. If you're from Ottawa, you know.
Yes.
Everyone works in the government, basically.
So true. But it was as a videographer, which was a really cool, interesting job, because
how do you do that for the government? Usually it's just like a desk job.
No, there aren't that many positions within the government like that. And I'm so grateful to have been able to get that opportunity. But yeah, I just being a jack of all trades, really attending ministerial events, and then recording little video messages for the ministers every once in a while. And they sent me to travel a little bit too, which was really cool. It allowed me to really hone in on my video skills. So I'm super grateful for
How long did you do that for?
So I still do contract work with them, but I started there in 2016.
So what, were you a student at the time?
Yes.
And you were being you were traveling with the government. I don't know any other student who's done that. I definitely was not doing that.
To be fair, I think initially in the first like couple of years, I was still sort of interning for them as a co-op student. And so I don't think I was traveling as much in the early days. But,
That's awesome.
but yeah, super, super great. Super grateful for that opportunity. And then, so 2018 is when I stumbled across that wedding video that changed everything for me. I was so set on trying my hand at wedding videography.
Can I just ask, what was it about the video? You said like the emotions that it brought for you, but
Yeah.
what was it that made it this point in time that it just kind of shifted your path that you wanted to go on?
I think there were a couple things. And it's funny because I've never been someone who dreamt of getting married. So the idea of marriage wasn't what drew me in, so to speak. But I very much am like a hopeless romantic, and just being a Taylor Swift fan, it tends to be someone who's kind of drawn to lyrics and words and poetry. And this video, visually very beautiful, but the audio that was in this video was unreal, from like just the sound design.
It was the experience.
The experience. You
They
felt
really
like
immersed you. Okay.
Yeah, literally. You felt immersed in this world that they had created. And then they have these beautiful vows that are just overlaid over top. And I was just like sobbing. And I had never really watched any video that had made me sob like that. I mean, maybe a couple movies here and there, but it just really completely redefined my idea of like what a wedding film can be. And it didn't have to be this like tacky display where only the couple likes the video because it's of them. You know what I mean? It was really this experience. Anyone could watch this and like relate to what was being, you know?
Yeah, there's actually science behind this. It's the same thing as watching a movie.
Yeah.
And you like feel emotional. You're like, why am I getting emotional over a movie? But it's actually because I think there's like a part of your brain that gets activated because you feel like you're living that experience yourself.
Absolutely.
So what you're sharing makes sense. It makes sense why you might have felt so emotionally drawn. It's kind of meant to do that. And if it's done well, if it's executed really well, then yeah, I'm sure that was a really good videographer editor that did that.
Yeah, and what was such a full circle moment for me was because I fell in love with the two filmmakers who had made this video, obviously, and they were based out in Vancouver. And over the years, I have actually become really great friends with them. Oh. And last year, I got to speak at a conference alongside them. We were both speaking at this conference, and it was such a full circle moment. I literally have goosebumps thinking about it because it was like these were the people that really started it all for me, and now I get to call them friends. And yeah, they're incredible, and I still to this day look up to them so much. But
that's incredible.
Yeah.
Wow. That must be a marker of success for you to say like I did that, you know? I love it.
Yeah. No, it was awesome.
Okay. So communications in university.
Yes.
You entered in the government. You did a few jobs, and so what was next for you?
What was next for me? So it was really coming across that video, deciding I wanted to try it, but not knowing exactly where to start. So I sought out somewhat mentors, I guess, in my city, people who seemed to be established in the wedding industry. And I just sent them a little message over Instagram asking if I could just shadow them for a little bit. And basically what happened is I spent an entire wedding season just kind of observing and being taken under their wing. And they were the first ones to kind of give me my first wedding opportunity because they were fully booked for the following year. And there was this inquiry that came in and they're like, well, we can't take this. Would you want to take this? You know? So yeah, so I feel like it was a really great way to kind of immerse myself into it without just sort of fumbling around trying to figure things out as I go. By the time I started my first season on my own, I had an established system for things, and I bypassed that whole beginner phase.
Yeah.
Plus I had all the technical skills figured out in my previous experience. So yeah, I feel like my rise was kind of quick, but it's because I really just took a year before to really learn how to do it before I did it on my own.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it kind of came in pieces for you. In the beginning, you were learning the skill of videography. And then once you got into the wedding videography space, you're lucky to have a mentor around you to kind of help you get there. And then through their network, then you were able to take your first opportunity. So it's kind of like just, it kind of sounds like it was organic.
Yeah, I think it's a mix of things just happening organically for sure. Sometimes it's just luck on as to who you meet, what video on YouTube you come across, that kind of thing. And then also I think there's an element of really being able to execute when given the opportunity to perform, right? And so it's making sure that when that opportunity comes, you're not using it as a way to practice. You're really using that as a way to really showcase the skills that you've been working on on the back end, right? So I think that's where I've really been able to kind of excel, is when given these opportunities that I know are going to take me to that next level. I do the work beforehand to ensure that on the day of, I am like ready to go.
I can show up. I can really shine, do a good job.
Yeah, exactly. And so I just think that sometimes that's not the case with everyone. And at least in my industry, I do feel as though sometimes newer videographers use weddings to kind of take off, and they don't plan on staying in weddings forever. They use it as a way to,
like a stepping stone.
A stepping stone to like develop their skills, because you have to kind of do a little bit of everything, and then they move on to something else. But at this point in my career, it was kind of the final stepping stone, and I had used other ways to kind of hone in on my skills, so that once I got there, I was like, I knew what I was doing. I had systems. And so, people often see the end result and think that the rise was really quick, but it was literally 10 years of me trying a bunch of different things before I finally found my calling, so to speak. And people only see the top part, right? But it's like I had to make so many mistakes in the years prior before I kind of figured my stuff out. But
people might say, this girl's in her 20s. She's won awards for filmmaking. It does really seem like you've got so much success at such a young age. But like you said, hey, I had to intern in the government. I did all this prior stuff. I wasn't even studying this in university. I just happened to take a class related to this. It feels like a mix of chance, a bit of passion. You took those opportunities, you went for it, and especially skill. You wouldn't have been able to do this first wedding had you not built that skill for all those years. So,
and I don't want people to think, because sometimes people might think, oh, well, you've been doing this since you were so young. No wonder in your 20s you're able to excel at whatever it is that you do. But I would encourage listeners to really reflect on, I think we all have skills or interests that we've had for a very long time that we don't even recognize as skill sets.
We're unaware of this superpower that we have, or this thing that we could potentially be good at, because we haven't even tried doing it yet.
Right, because we had our blinders on and we were pursuing other things maybe. But I would encourage you, if you're someone who's like, well, I'm already in my 20s and I want to start something new, or maybe you're older than that, we all have things that we just naturally gravitate towards. And I would encourage you to really think back on, like, what are those things? And I'm sure that, wherever you are right now, you can kind of use the experiences and the things that you've kind of gained along the way to build this career for yourself. Because and you can start at any age. There's no, because I know personally, for a long time, I felt this pressure to kind of achieve X, Y, Z by a certain age. And I think I'm just realizing, like, life is long and there are so many years ahead of us to create the life that we want. And so, don't let your age or a number kind of define what it is that you can or can't do, There's always time.
Life is not linear, right? You don't know what your end goal is today. I hate when people ask the question, where do you see yourself in 5 years or 10 years? It's like, I don't know, because I think in 5 years, I'm going to have different goals or a different, vision for my life. Like, I don't know if my vision is always going to be the same. So to say that in 5 years or 10 years, this is where I want to be, it's just unrealistic, I find, for a lot of people. And what you're sharing reminds me of myself, because I have a background in finance and marketing. I studied that in university. Actually, I did finance, didn't love it. Did a second degree in marketing, which I did enjoy a bit more. And now I work in the financial sector, but I work in team enablement, team operations. So the skills that I've been honing in on over the last few years has been like team facilitation, coaching. And now with the podcast, it's another opportunity for me to kind of hone in on that skill of, storytelling, right? And I enjoy it. And so I realized, even though my path hasn't been super linear, I still have this lingering kind of thing in me that's like the idea of storytelling, connecting with others, that like listening is a skill. Like people don't realize it doesn't come intuitively to everyone.
There's this quote that I absolutely love, and it's not what you do, it's who you get to be when you're doing what you're doing. Meaning, in your case, like you love that connecting with others piece, you love that storytelling piece. And so it doesn't really matter what your job title is, as long as the underlying thing that you get to do is, storytelling, you're going to love what you do. And so your job can change, things might evolve throughout your life, but it's important to kind of listen to like the things that you feel drawn to. And that way, like, you're not so attached to the title and more so how you feel when you're doing what you're doing.
In the outcome, you're not as attached to what is the result of XYZ. Because if I start thinking like, if it pans out, then sure, the result would be great. That result would be awesome. But just the fact that I get to do this for me is already so exciting. And I feel like you'll get there when you get there. You know what I mean? There's no sense in rushing something that you're enjoying anyway.
No, and I love that. And I think just as a society, we teach kids to really focus in on the things that they're good at rather than what they actually feel happy doing or what feels good, right? We're so focused on that result from such an early age, right? Whether it's grades, right? We're looking at the grades and it's not about whether you actually like math or not. It's whether you're good at math that's going to get you the scholarships, that's going to get you whatever. And so that's been a huge unlearning for me, is like I spent most of my life trying to chase what I was good at and really just trying to cut out all the things I was bad at as soon as possible to achieve the results and the recognition and the whatever.
Yeah.
At the expense of, oh my gosh, do I actually enjoy any of this? Because at the end of the day, like if you don't enjoy what you do, you can't do it long term. You can be really good at something but burn out really quick if it's something that, it's just not sustainable.
Yeah. It's a very like quantitative way of measuring success, or when it comes down to it, if you don't enjoy it, what's the point? You're spending 8+ hours a day on that thing. So I want to touch a bit on support systems, because I think as an entrepreneur, that must be something that is crucial to have, whether it's friends, family, mentors around you that are there to like support you and help you upskill in what you're doing. So can you tell me a bit about like, what does your support system look like?
If I just look back on just my childhood in general, it all comes back to my mom and her like endless support for and just belief in me. There was never a moment as a kid where I thought I can't do something. We didn't have a lot growing up. We didn't have a lot of money, but when it came to experiences, my mom was set on like ensuring that I could partake in as many experiences as I wanted to partake in, and always somehow made it happen for me, right? So like material things weren't really valued in my household, but experiences were. And it's kind of funny to look back on, but like truly, like I would try out for every sports team, for every club, and there was never an assumption that I wouldn't make it, because I just
I love that.
I had an incredible mom who just never told me no, in the sense of like, you can't achieve this thing. And, as a kid, I think it's like at some point as you grow up, you will fail at things. But as a kid, I didn't fail very much. And that really built up my confidence really quickly. And so I attribute so much of my success to just having been a really confident kid. But so my support system, obviously, over the years has changed, has evolved, has grown, has dwindled. Like it's gone through all sorts of different waves. And I would say that in my early 20s, as I was really building my business, I really, unfortunately, kind of cut out a lot of people from my life unintentionally. I just stopped really pouring into the connections around me in the ways that I had in the past. And that kind of came and came to bite me a little bit later on, a couple of years ago, really, when I had this moment of clarity of like, oh my gosh, like I looked around and I felt like I had no more friends. And so, but in terms of like support is absolutely everything. And I think over the last couple of years, I've made a really intentional effort to rebuild that support system, because I think we have a tendency, and maybe it's just the Leo in me.
Oh, you're Leo.
I'm a Leo.
Oh, I love that.
But, it's great to have a lot of like belief in yourself, and you need that to be successful at anything you do. You need to be your number one supporter. But at a certain point, you need to also realize that you would not be here without the support of the people around you. And I'm realizing that now, and my life just feels so much more full now that I've really intentionally built up my support system and my community again, after having, neglected it for a few years.
But, we kind of touched on this earlier off camera, but we talked a bit about, when you're building a skill set, it's honestly pretty normal to kind of like hone in on it and remove distractions. And so maybe, what you had done, it was unintentional to kind of like, focus on yourself, not really focus on building those relationships as much. But then once you get to that next step, you're like, hey, I miss having people around me, or I miss like connecting with people, my friends. So, but it sounds like it's a very common thing entrepreneurs go through. I think you hear this a lot. Entrepreneurship is lonely sometimes.
Yes, yeah.
So
yeah. No, and I try not to be too hard on myself in, because it was somewhat of a, it was unintentional, and it all happened kind of in a way where I didn't even realize it was happening until it was like it got really bad and I felt extremely lonely. And so I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. To be successful, there's going to be, chapters of your life where you have to really just put the blinders on somewhat and focus. But I think there's a difference between establishing like boundaries, like as in, maybe I don't want to be partying all the time, or I don't want to be, involved in a certain lifestyle that is going to detract from my goal of being successful in business. But I think no matter how busy you are, I think if I could go back, I would probably try to still maintain relationships, just different types of relationships. Maybe the ones that suited me, as a teenager or like in my early 20s, maybe those relationships no longer suited the vision I had for my life.
Newer version
but I
of you.
didn't really make a point to find more people within this new world that I wanted to build for myself that would really support me in that new chapter of my life, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I think what I'm just coming to realize is like people are so important.
Yeah.
People are so important. And if I were to, start a new venture or something like that, I would make a point to still have people in my life, no matter how busy or, focused I get on my business.
I mean, yeah, like to me, honestly, life is people. Life is the people around you, the connections. And I think clearly that does matter to you because, again, you work in an industry that is so people focused and relationship focused as well.
100%.
So clearly that's a value for you.
Well, and I think if anything, I was going to these weddings and realizing how rich these people's lives were with people and relationships, like all sorts of relationships, right? Like their family dynamics were not always, but the family dynamics in a lot of cases were really great. Or, they had these like friends that had been like lifelong friends in their lives still. And I was just, it's kind of like mirroring back and you're like, you just start to question your own life and you're like,
I wonder if you have any stories you could share with the podcast with the listeners.
Ooh, I don't know. Let me think. Honestly, I've just been very, very, very lucky with the weddings that I have had. I think I've just been very selective, if anything, with the types of weddings that I do take on.
Oh, how so?
The way I kind of like to explain it is like I'm like the bouncer at a club with the velvet rope. And I as the business owner I can decide who I let in and who I don't let in. And, people can have conflicting opinions on that. But at the end of the day, my business has grown quicker as a result because I've been very clear on what kind of clients I want to have. And so when the types of clients find me, they're like, that's exactly who I want, versus I'm not this like generic wedding videographer to them. So a big thing with my community is like we're big Swifties. So I tend to attract a lot of Taylor Swift loving couples. And I've had a few weddings at this point where they've incorporated like Taylor Swift vows to their ceremonies.
Aren't a lot of her songs used in weddings? Or am I wrong about that?
I mean, yeah, definitely. Like, there's a lot of first dance songs, a lot of lover, or love stories played a lot on the dance floor.
I heard a lot of her music is related to her exes. So how is that wedding appropriate?
That is a fantastic question. She's got a couple lovey-dovey songs, though, and they get used a lot. So, but yeah, no, overall, I'm just really, really lucky with my clients. So I don't know if I have any, like, horror stories.
Okay, we'll talk about those off camera. It's fine. We still want her to get business. So you had a great support system, but I guess what advice do you have for people who may not have the same fantastic support system that you've had?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. The first thing I would say is, because I'm going based off of, this was me 2 years ago when I decided I wanted to really rebuild my support system. These were kind of the steps that I went through personally. The first was to look at who I had been connected to in the past and see if, like, there were any old connections that I wanted to maybe reinvest in and reconnect with, because those, you already have that shared history, that shared experience together, and it might just mean having to, like, send them a message to remind them that you exist still. You
remember that time in 4th grade when I gave you my snacks?
Exactly. So I would say the first thing was, like, rekindling old connections that I had. That was probably, like, the easiest one to do. But then I also started attending, like, events in my area in person again, that were aligned with, like, the interests that I had now, you know what I mean? Because your interests might have changed from, back in the day. But yeah, I started just attending events in real life, and at every single event, it was the case every single time, I would make at least one good connection that would lead to something, whether it was friendship or a business opportunity or something like that. So that was super helpful. And then I would say, if all else fails, like, always look to online communities, right? I've had so many of my in-person connections start from, us having some sort of relationship online, whether it was like fangirling over Taylor Swift or something, you know what I mean? Yeah. And so those things can really flourish, and, like, there's communities for absolutely everything you can imagine on the internet. And so there's bound to be someone or some group out there that, you align with. But really, yeah, it's just about feeling connected to something again, I think, for a lot of people. And life, it's gonna have its ups and downs, and, like, nothing is permanent, and you have to keep working at it. That's the thing with relationships, right? It's not like a one and done thing. You have to kind of commit to, like, continuing to invest in those people. But the reward is just so fulfilling when you have finally feel like you found your people. You know what I mean?
It's such a beautiful feeling to have people in your life that have seen different facets of you.
Absolutely.
And different versions of you. And, like, life happens, but the people that have watched you kind of grow, it's just so nice. It's almost like family, right? Like, the only people you can say have really seen different versions of you like that is probably your family members and, your close friends. So totally agree. And I love that you kind of gave different ways, because yes, you can reconnect with old friends that you haven't chatted with in a long time, but you can also find people organically and online. There's so many communities and different niches online where you can meet people in a way that I would never be able to meet someone who, like, this specific thing that I like like, I could, but it'd be harder to do it in person, right?
Absolutely. And I think you just have to be open as someone who might be considering, like, being on a non-traditional path or something like that. You have to be open to the idea that, like, the people that, like you said, kind of grew up with you and know you as a certain way, it's okay to redefine yourself, reinvent yourself, and find a new community of people who might, like, fit better with who you are, and it's really hard. It's really hard to, sometimes it means even having to, like, sever certain connections that you might have had in order to allow you to, move to the next chapter of your life. But that's the thing with online communities and stuff. There are people out there that are in the exact same place as you, and who are just, like, also craving that connection. And, like, it's just a matter of, like, finding them, right?
So you talked a bit about kind of networking, and you did talk a little bit about, like, some of the defining moments. So one of them was that wedding video that you watched, and it kind of opened up your eyes to how much you love the idea of videography, wedding videography. Are there any other kind of key defining moments that made you feel even more connected to the path you're on right now with this career?
Yeah. I would say before even finding wedding videography, the defining moment that kind of me realize that like I could actually make a career out of video production was when I was 19. I was a university student, but I was also kind of a high level athlete, and I had made this national team for ultimate frisbee. And so I was very set on, reaching my athletic goals and my academic goals. Those were like my two things that I was kind of set on at the time. Again, still thinking that like all of my creative stuff was just hobbies. And then when I was 19, I unfortunately tore my ACL, which is just like a ligament in your knee. And it was a really, really long process of like, healing from that. I had to have knee surgery, and it was like about a year of like recovery after that. And it was the first time in my life where, you think you have so much control over your life and like the steps you're going to take to achieve X, Y, Z. And this was the first time in my life, at least, where it felt like the control was taken away from me. And I really had to just surrender to the fact that there was nothing I could do. I couldn't speed up this process. I had to really slow down for the first time in my life. And it was a big moment of reflection of like, okay, if I can't play sports at the level that I was currently playing at, then what's next for me? Because I'm not someone who can like stay still for very long. So that was the turning point for me, where I I took all that energy that I typically used for like my athletic endeavors, and I just shifted it into video. It was around that time that I started doing that class in university for video production. And it was a class project that led to a paid opportunity with the university to film the sports teams there, the varsity sports teams. And so that was like, that shift happened around the same time that I had hurt myself. And I got paid to make videos for the first time. And I said, it was just this big light bulb moment of, wow, okay, I can be a professional videographer.
It's not just a hobby. It's not just this fun thing that I'm doing. It's real. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that kind of put me on the path of like, okay, just trying a bunch of different things until something stuck, which ultimately led to weddings. The other defining moment was in 2022. I just had a very, very difficult year where I had a series of very unfortunate events happen, multiple deaths in my family, a friend passed away. It all kind of ended with my partnership of 7 years ending as well. And so it was so much death that happened that year, and it was awful. I went through some very difficult times. So that happened in 2022, and it was like a conscious effort to, again, reinvest in my connections again that I had neglected. And also, I needed to reevaluate just how much time I was spending in my business, because at this point it was taking a toll on my relationships and my health specifically, to a point where it was just not sustainable. And so that was the final, for me, defining moment where it set me on the path where I am now, where I just genuinely feel like the most authentic version of myself, where I've shed all the layers of things that I feel like I was doing from a place of like people pleasing. And I'm just genuinely living my life for myself now.
Wow. You went through these really incredibly hard, difficult times, and you kind of emerge out of these things kind of with better clarity around yourself. What do you actually want? Life is short. What do I actually want to spend my time doing? Who do I want around me? And so clearly had to shed some weight, but coming out of that, you're refreshed. You seem happy with what you're doing. So I'm very happy to hear that.
Thank you.
And going back to the hobbies thing.
Yeah.
I've actually always been the kind of person who, I never really had hobbies. Like I had a couple of things I used to do in high school. Like I used to play soccer. I used to, do choir. I'm going to take this out. I'm not.
I love it.
But all to say, I always kind of thought of hobbies as like, oh, well, that's not what I'm going to end up doing. But lo and behold, you took this thing that you love and you turned it into a career. And you didn't have necessarily the skills when you first started. You built the skill over time. So yeah, I just find that really inspiring.
I think so much of my adult life is trying to get back to who I was as a kid, you know, and what I enjoyed doing before the world started to impose all of these, like, you know, things that I should be doing.
Yeah.
It's really just reverting to like, okay, what did I do in my spare time? And like, all I can think about is I used to spend hours and hours and hours in my bedroom just either writing little short stories or making silly videos, and that's what I want to go back to.
It's like your essence.
It's my essence because it's like what I genuinely love to do. There was no one was like telling me I needed to do it. I just wanted to do it. And like, anyways, I think if most people can like trace back to like there's always little clues along the way, and it's just that we as adults kind of start to like ignore those gut feelings, ignore those instincts a lot more. But there's always clues. You just have to kind of like really think back on like, what did you enjoy doing?
I love that. You said you grew up with a mother that was very supportive and that helped build your confidence from a young age. Were there other things that I guess you did to build your own confidence?
And I feel like I've had conversations with other entrepreneurs, other creatives, where they also had this happen. There was this voice inside of me and I don't know exactly what age, but there was a voice that was like, you're gonna live an extraordinary life, a life that's like not like everyone else's. And I can't really pinpoint where or how that came about. It was a mantra that I developed, and it's kind of guided so many of my decisions over the years. That being said, I think one of the biggest things that I can attribute some of my confidence to is the fact that I was always a big fish in a small pond, in the sense that, I mean, the schools that I went to were always really small. So the opportunities to kind of rise and like be a leader were much easier than if I had gone to a school with, you know, thousands of kids.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And
Okay.
so I think that was a huge confidence builder, right? Because if you're trying out for the team, a sports team at your elementary school, and, you know, you're a class of 30, and like, you know, I don't know, I just felt like my chances of making the teams and like good at something were just much higher. Anyway, all that to say, being a big fish in a small pond was such a confidence builder, because with every little thing that I did, it was like evidence that I could be either good at something or be a leader in a certain space or environment. Whereas I think about like, had I gone to like bigger schools or like even just lived in a bigger city, you just feel so small and you feel like so insignificant. Not always, but it's just much harder to build that confidence in the beginning.
But I think what you also touch on is confidence comes from doing things.
Absolutely.
And it comes from, like, confidence is just proving to yourself that you can do things, basically.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Because a lot of people like me, I often just go in this freeze mode where if I'm not doing something exactly the way I want to do it, then I'm like, I over rotate on it until I don't do the thing. But then had I just done it in a sloppy way anyway, I would have at least proved to myself, like, you can do this. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I love that. And I think, you know, one of the things that I struggled with, if I'm being honest, is I didn't develop that scrappy, I don't know what the word is, but
Like, roughly right.
attempting something, knowing that there's a possibility that I might not be very good at it, but the outcome does not matter. I think it got to the point where I would only try to do things if I knew that I would be very good at it right off the bat, so that it wasn't embarrassing or I didn't have to. But all that to say, I think, you know, once you're kind of the big fish in the small pond, then you can make that leap to the bigger pond at some point. But it's tricky when you don't, like you said, it's like you need to do the thing first, so that in the future, when other things come up, you're like, well, I've done this before, I can do this again.
Yeah.
You know, start small. I think people often, big picture, think of like the big thing that they want to accomplish, and like they're looking up the mountain without even having taken that first step, right? And so, you know, take those baby steps, take the little things that are gonna give you like instant little confidence boosters, right?
Like, you want to enjoy the process as well. You want to actually remember it as like a really exciting thing that you got to do, and it takes time to do that. So
Yeah, absolutely.
So Being a female entrepreneur, do you feel the pressure to kind of hit certain life milestones that you think maybe men don't necessarily experience?
Absolutely, absolutely. And oh, I just I just feel like I did my 20s backwards. I was so eager to grow up and achieve all of those milestones that I don't know where they come from. It's just they get planted in your head at some point. And so I really did my early 20s in a way where like I was in a very serious committed relationship starting from 19 years old. And, you know, we bought the house, we had the dog. It was like we had that white picket fence life. And I'm looking back, and in my case, I'm actually really grateful that I did it so early on, because I did the thing and quickly realized that I didn't want any of it. Mm-hmm. Right. Whereas I think we're at that age, you and I, where I think people are starting to kind of build that life and go in that trajectory. And some will love it and others won't.
Yeah.
But I kind of learned it early, and it's allowed me to kind of redirect and go down a different path. But no, the pressure is to settle down, to have kids, you know, get married, whatever that all entails, like, are absolutely real. And I've definitely felt them. And especially as like I reach sort of like that 30, you know, age, it's just, it has a bigger hold on you. But it is ironic, because if someone from my childhood is listening to this, it's really interesting that I, of all people, am on this podcast talking about living a non-traditional life, because it's the complete opposite of who I've always been. But I think it's kind of like what you were saying about confidence comes in doing. I did the things, and that's the only way that you're going to know whether you like something or you don't. And so I would just encourage you, just if you feel called to do anything, whether professionally or personally, if you feel called to do anything, like, take the steps to go in that direction as quickly as you can, to figure out if that's truly how you, like, where you feel the most aligned.
Yeah. Test it out.
Right? Don't let it sit and fester in your mind. Like, really just, regardless of what it is, like, just take those steps to make it happen. And you'll find the answers, you know, whether it's good or bad.
So you're also in the wedding industry. As a videographer, you're watching these couples get married. Is there anything that you've learned from the relationships that you either want or don't want in your next relationship?
Yeah, and I've had a few conversations with other wedding filmmakers about this exact question. It's a tricky thing, because you're witnessing these people experience one of the happiest days of their lives. And I'm putting that in air quotations, because obviously, you know,
Depends.
It's a day.
Yeah.
It's a day in your life, right? And relationships are going to ebb and flow. But it's really hard as just someone who's there documenting these days not to kind of reflect on your own situations and compare your situation to someone's happiest day, right? It almost sets an impossible bar, right, for me sometimes, because I'm like, well, if it doesn't look like this, I don't want it. That being said, I have learned so much from my couples, and I feel like I'm in a really unique position, because I meet with them a couple of times before their wedding day to really understand their story and, like, who they are as people, their dynamic. And so in some ways I feel like a little bit of a researcher. Like, I get to really sit in.
Like, you're an anthropologist.
Yeah, I basically am like a podcast host, and I get to just like listen to people talk about their relationships. And what I've obviously come to learn is that there are just so many ways that partnership can exist. There's not one way for love to exist. And I think weddings are, you know, kind of, it's like a microcosm. It's like how you celebrate a wedding day can be a reflection of like how you choose to live your life, right? And it shows a lot about like what you value as a couple, right? And I've just seen wedding days play out in so many different ways, right? I've had couples, you know, wake up in the morning, go surfing together, have some pizza, and then take a helicopter, just the two of them, up a mountain to like share their vows, you know. And
So
it
romantic.
was right. It was the cutest day. Truly, I was obsessed with them and their day. And then I've seen the complete opposite, where it's a 200-person wedding, right, where they just value that family aspect. It's a huge party. It's vibrant. Anyway, I've just seen love exist in so many forms. There's not one way to do it, and I think that's what I'm taking into. Not that I'm in a relationship or anything, but
inspiration
Yeah,
for future.
it gives me somewhat some reassurance that I have the power to build a relationship that feels authentic to me, and I don't have to follow whatever the traditional route is. I can find a partner that wants to live the same lifestyle as me, and we can have an awesome, unique partnership that looks nothing like anything that I've seen, and it can still work. You know what I mean? So that's the biggest kind of takeaway that I've taken.
I really enjoyed this conversation. Like, I learned a lot. So thank you for coming on.
Oh my gosh, it was such a pleasure, and we'll have to do this again.
Oh yeah, you'll hear from me.
Perfect. Perfect.
Where can people find you?
Yeah, so my business Instagram is Dear Darling Films. So you can definitely follow us there. We're also on TikTok. Same thing, Dear Darling Films. And if you feel called to, follow my personal account where I just share the day-to-day stuff, you can follow me on my personal Instagram. It's just Tash Cloutier.
Tash, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you very much.
Bye.